Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. Today's topic is fairly interesting. We're going to be talking about the health benefits of meditation and why we believe meditation may be helpful in treating certain types of mental illness. And today specifically I want to talk about some general theories about how the brain has evolved over time. And I recognize that this is kind of an oversimplistic explanation of brain evolution. But I'm going to go ahead and get started and have you take a look at some pictures of the brain. And we're going to start with the evolutionary design of the brain, that theory. And specifically, we're going to be looking at something called the reptilian complex. And the reptilian complex is believed to be the most primitive centers of the brain. And in this general theory of the brain, we have to understand that there are really four distinct parts of the brain that we're going to be looking at when we look at human evolution, starting with the reptile or the reptilian brain. And this is the first part of the brain that we believe we have evolved and developed. It's a very ancient part of the brain. It's where the breathing centers, our ability to breathe. We need the reptilian brain in order to breathe and in order to engage in necessary functions to live. If we lost our reptile brain, we would cease to live. So the primitive emotions, the capacity to breathe most likely come from the reptile brain. What we learn from the reptile or from the snake brain, it even looks like a snake. If you take a look at it, you can see that early formation of the brain and then it's extending out to the spinal cord. We're really seeing a snake. We're really seeing the early evolution of that part of the brain that was the snake, if you're looking at the pictures that I'm showing you right now. And that snake brain, what we learn from the snake brain is also what we see in snakes or reptiles. We also see, what we see in the snake brain is the first emotions, the sexual drive, the ability, the desire to reproduce. But we also learn from the snake brain what the first emotion or the guiding emotion is of human beings. And what we learn from the reptile brain is the early evolution of emotions. And the first emotion is fear. The ability of a snake to feel fear in order to survive, to retract from something that is seen as a threat to the survival of that reptile or that snake. So in a snake, feeling fear or the capacity to feel fear is the snake retracting. That is the retracting that a snake does in a state of fear. It's also what human beings do when we're in a state of fear. It's the fright or flight response where we pull back. Just like the snake, we pull back when we feel a sense of fear. The second emotion or the second evolution of emotions we also see from the snake, and that is the strike response. That is anger. So the first emotion is fear, and then the second emotion we learn from the snake is retract and then attack or strike. So fear is the retraction by the snake, and then to strike or attack is anger. These are the most primitive centers of the brain. It's believed that people with antisocial personality disorder, what Robert Hare would call antisocial personality or sociopathy, spends a lot of time in the reptile brain. We see this in prisons. Just a desire to survive, to get food, to get shelter, sex, and fear and survival and violence. So that is the reptile brain. And a lot of the time we do battle with the reptile brain. We see also in the symbolism of religion this idea of the snake as the enemy, or the snake is trying to seduce us into doing something that we shouldn't be doing, whether it's greed or lust or fear or anger, those are associated with negative emotions, and they're the thing that we see in religious and spiritual literature we're supposed to be trying to avoid. We're trying to overcome the snake. But from a scientific perspective, I think it's a rather brilliant analogy, because the snake does in fact exist within us. It is our reptilian complex. However, I think most scientists and most neuroscientists would be far less judgmental about that snake, since the snake is necessary to survive, a desire to have sexual intimacy, the ability to feel fear is vital to survival. And of course, the capacity to breathe, the breathing mechanism is part of the reptilian complex. So we could say with confidence that without the reptilian complex, survival itself would be impossible. So we don't make enemies of the snake. We understand that the snake brain, or the reptilian brain, serves an important function. The next major step in the evolution of the human brain is something called the limbic system. And again, I want to clarify that this is an oversimplification of the human brain's evolution. But if you take a look at the limbic system is capable of regulating hormones, specifically hormones necessary to mammals. Mammals, of course, had live birth, they had fur, they usually lactate, some type of lactation is taking place. And with that came the capacity, we believe, of love. If you look at the book, A General Theory of Love, it was believed that live birth, it was necessary to feel this emotion or this capacity to love. This was also in the General Theory of Love. In the book General Theory of Love, they talked about this as part of the evolution of what we call the rabbit brain. But rabbit brain really doesn't do it justice. We do know that in human evolution, we go from the reptile evolution to live birth. The early ancestors of humans were shrew-like creatures. They lived in trees, they had hair, and they did in fact have live birth. And this is probably a creature that was developing something of a limbic system, a capacity to love, and a capacity to produce certain hormones that were necessary to ovulation, giving live birth, having a capacity to love one's child in a way that we don't see in previous or more primitive animals like reptiles. They'll keep the eggs warm, and then when the babies hatch, they may move away or move on, or in some cases in extreme stress may actually even eat their own babies. So this is the second evolution of the brain that's thought to be the limbic system, which is the capacity to love. And so now you have two brains in conflict. You have the conflict between what the reptile wants and what the limbic system wants. And they're two entirely different brains, and yet they want entirely different things. The third evolution, or what we call the chimp brain, we never evolved from chimps, but we do share a common ancestor with the chimpanzee, was the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex, or the neocortex area, was the capacity to have higher learning. It was the ability to have more complex ideas and more executive function. Prefrontal cortex also appears to be the capacity to feel more complex emotions like shame, remorse, or understanding to some extent the consequences of one's actions. That is the prefrontal cortex. A conscious understanding of self may also come from the prefrontal cortex, that we understand that we have a self. I think, therefore I am. This may be part of the prefrontal cortex. And then finally, the last part of the brain to evolve, or the fourth brain, was the frontal lobes. And this is the executive part of the brain that does know right from wrong, takes responsibility for one's actions, or the leadership part of the brain. And this is the human brain. It's the final evolution, and it's the thing that distinguishes humans from their previous ancestors. So now getting back to the conversation of why we think meditation may help or be constructive, particularly in people who suffer from depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and even some types of personality disorders commonly referred to as cluster B, or antisocial personality disorder, or sociopathy, or psychopathy, if you've been studying any of Robert Hare's work. And we believe it's because meditation quiets the brain and allows communication to happen between these four distinct, separate brains. By calming the brain, by quieting the brain, these various different aspects of the brain are able to work together, not in conflict, but together, and resolve complex challenges. It's also one of the reasons why we think people who meditate on a regular basis tend to score better when taking exams, because they're not coming from a place of fear and anxiety. They're coming from a deep state of relaxation, and the various different parts of the brain that are consolidating and taking in information are able to more effectively share and organize that information, interpret that information. One of the reasons why we think people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder or any kind of severe trauma have trouble with learning, may have challenges with learning, is because fear is not a great motivator when it comes to education. And in fact, fear may actually inhibit one's capacity to learn new things. It actually puts most of the attention on the reptilian brain rather than higher faculties that are capable of more complex thoughts. All right, so if you'd like to find out more about meditation, I can go ahead and put links below. There are several different types of meditation that have been clinically studied to be effective for anxiety and depression. Those include transcendental meditation. There's been some studies on that. VIPASSANA meditation, which was, there was some experiments of that done both in prisons in India and also in the United States. And there are other forms of meditation that have also been used for depression: Zen techniques in meditation and Tibetan techniques for meditation. So as I said, if you'd like to find out more about meditation, its effects on the brain, studies on brain health, or find some type of meditation that you can learn in your area, I will link all of that below. I want to thank you for watching this brief video. My name is Dr. Whimsy Anderson. If you'd like to make an appointment with a naturopathic doctor, I'm available here in Los Angeles and by telemedicine for general wellness coaching. I'll link all that information below. Thanks for watching and take care. Bye-bye.